All right, so one of the things that I wanted to do is I kind of wanted to look at historical footage about this conflict before it really popped off and people started paying attention to it, because now is really the only time that people are actually paying attention. Sorry about the quality. You got to remember, this is historical footage, okay? So we're going to be looking at footage from 11 years ago. And I'm not entirely too sure if that's when this was made, but this is definitely in the past. So this is a new Cold War. Ukraine violence escalates. Leaked tapes suggest U.S. was plotting a coup. Okay, so right off the bat, we're going to have to be a little bit careful with this because this is obviously going to have a little bit of a slant. But you have to remember, we live inside the Western world. There is a lot of propaganda that is being pushed on us to make us look like the good guys. It is very important that we have voices that are talking about the perspective of the other side. The truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Of tear gas, which they sprayed into our eyes.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. A short-lived truce has broken down in Ukraine as street battles have erupted between anti-government protesters and police. Last night, the country's embattled president and the opposition leaders demanding his resignation called for a truce and negotiations to try to resolve Ukraine's political crisis. But the truce...
Okay, so right off the bat, what we can identify is we have protests inside Ukraine that are big enough to warrant news coverage. Apparently, there was a controversial leader at the time. So now we kind of get a little bit of perspective of why Ukraine is kind of a gray zone. I don't really know much about the situation, but that's why we're here. I'm just kind of walking you through my thought process.
The truce only lasted a few hours. The last 3 days have been the bloodiest period of Ukraine's 22-year post-Soviet. The truce only lasted a few resolve Ukraine's political crisis. But the truce only lasted a few hours. The last 3 days have been the bloodiest period of Ukraine's 22-year post-Soviet history. Over 50 people have died, including at least 21 today. The truce ended today when armed protesters attempted to retake Independence Square. Both sides have accused the other of using live ammunition. A Ukrainian paramedic described the chaotic scene.
Oh my God.
Some bodies are at the concert hall, some are at the barricades. Now there are maybe around 15 or 20 dead. It is hard to count as some are carried away, others are resuscitated. Now, as far as I know, 3 dead people are at the city hall, and 2 more dead are at the main post office. There's so many at the concert hall that we didn't even take them.
The Ukrainian Parliament Rada and cabinet buildings have reportedly been evacuated because of fears they could be stormed by protesters. The street clashes are occurring.
So that totally looks like a protest right there. Bus burnt down. Wonder where else things like that are called protests.
Occurring while the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych is meeting with the foreign ministers from Germany, Poland, and France. The Obama administration stepped up pressure on the Ukrainian government Wednesday by announcing a visa ban on 20 members of the Ukrainian government. The U.S. is also threatening to place sanctions on the Ukrainian government. The protests began in late November after President Yanukovych reversed his decision to sign a long-awaited trade deal with the European Union, or EU, to forge stronger ties with Russia instead. To talk more about the latest in Ukraine, we're joined by Stephen Cohen, professor.
Okay, so there we go. So we have a leader in Ukraine that wanted to strengthen its trade ties with Russia. Now, all of a sudden, these violent protesters are coming up and trying to overthrow the government. I'm not necessarily sure a decision like that warrants violent action to protest. Most people don't care enough about trade deals and geopolitics to do this kind of stuff unless they have ulterior motives and they're being pushed by somebody to do it. What is one thing that the United States has been absolutely known for since the Cold War? We go in and we fund rebel groups, and we have done this multiple times throughout history. South America, all the Middle East. This is a hallmark U.S. tactic. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that we did it. What I'm saying is we have done it quite a bit. And it's literally like the first thing we decide to do whenever somebody in a different country that we view should be doing business with us and only us. The first thing we decide to do is topple their government. with funded protests and stuff. We find the most extreme groups in these areas, and then we fund them. It doesn't matter if they're bad people. It doesn't matter if they are bad people. As long as they are pro-West, we fund them. Where do you think Osama bin Laden came from?
Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at New York University and Princeton University. His most recent book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War, is now out in paperback. His latest piece in The Nation is called Distorting Russia, How the American Media Misrepresent Putin, Sochi, and Ukraine. So talk about the latest, Professor Cohen.
Where do you want me to begin? I mean, we are watching history being made, but history of the worst kind. That's what...
Sounds familiar, don't it? It's almost like history is being made every single day, right? That's why you can't ever fall asleep. It's my biggest criticism of the baby boomers and Gen X. They were asleep at the wheel when they had power. All of this stuff that is getting done today, we have to do it in 4 years, 2 years before the midterms, 4 years if we get lucky. We have to fix 40, 50 years of super terrible politics, okay? Terrible politics. We have to do it fast.
That's what I'm telling my grandchildren. Watch this. What's happening there, let's take the big picture, then we can go to the small picture. The big picture is people are dying in the streets every day. The number 50 is certainly too few. They're still finding bodies.
What if this guy's still alive today?
Ukraine is splitting apart down the middle because Ukraine is not one country, contrary to what the American media, which speaks about the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Historically, ethnically, religiously, culturally, politically, economically, it's two countries. One half wants to stay close to Russia, the other wants to go west. We now have reliable reports that the anti-government forces in the streets, and there's some very nasty people among them.
I know it's really hard to see, and it's going to go through another wave of YouTube compression. That is not a protest. That is a war zone.
Are seizing weapons in Western Ukrainian military bases. So we have clearly the possibility of a civil war. And the longer-term outcome may be, and I want to emphasize this because nobody in the United States seems to want to pay attention to it, the outcome may be the construction, the emergence of a new Cold War divide between West and East, not this time, as it was for our generation, in faraway Berlin, but right on the borders of Russia, right through the heart of Slavic civilization. And if that happens, if that's the new Cold War divide, it's permanent instability and permanent potential for real war for decades to come.
Wow, this guy called it. This guy had it. He had it right on the nose. I mean, wow.
That's what's...
It's almost like it's like knowing what you're talking about gives you the ability to see the future. A lot of people miss that.
At stake. One last point. Also something that nobody in this country wants to talk about. The Western authorities, who bear some responsibility for what's happened, and who therefore also have blood on their hands, are taking no responsibility. They're uttering utterly banal statements, which, because of their vacuous nature, are encouraging and rationalizing the people in Ukraine who are throwing Molotov cocktails, now have weapons, are shooting at police. We wouldn't permit them.
Wow. Western governments promoting violent protests? Couldn't be us.
In any Western capital, no matter how righteous the cause, but it's being condoned by the European Union and Washington as events unfold.
And when you say the Western countries who bear some responsibility, in what sense do they bear responsibility? I mean, clearly there's been an effort by the United States and Europe ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union to pull the former Soviet states into their economic sphere. But is that the way you're talking about?
I mean that. I mean that Moscow, here, look at it through Moscow's eyes. Since the Clinton administration in the 1990s.
Before we let him talk about this, look at it through Moscow's eyes. Right there, he has a tool in his arsenal that so many people do not have. If you look at Chris Voss, you have to look at tactical empathy. I know so many people have this emotional hardline about the way that the world is supposed to be. Russia bad, West good. It's not so cut and dry, and it never has, and it never will be. We are all being hit with propaganda. We are all being hit with lies. You have to look at the needs of the nation that is being, surrounded by this adversarial entity of NATO. And I know you can think that NATO is the good guys. You have the right to think that. I think NATO is generally, the good guys. But what I think is they are overplaying that hand. They are relying on them being the good guys no matter what. That is not the case. Russia is a cornered dog. At this point, you can kind of see the building tension for why we're seeing the things that we are today.
The U.S.-led West has been on a steady march toward post-Soviet Russia. Began with the expansion of NATO in the 1990s under Clinton. Bush then further expanded NATO all the way to Russia's borders. Then came the funding of what are euphemistically called NGOs, but they are political action groups funded by the West.
What is that? NGO, non-governmental organizations? We're seeing that today. I mean, look at all these people burning Teslas and stuff. Look at the BLM protests. Do you think they weren't doing the same thing to our own country that they were doing in every other single country in the world? Oh, no, they would never do it to us.
Inside Russia. Then came the decision to build missile defense installations along Russia's borders, allegedly against Iran, a country which has neither nuclear weapons nor any missiles to deliver them with.
They're trying to get them, though.
Then comes American military outpost in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, which led to the War of 2008, and now the West is at the gates of Ukraine. So that's the picture.
NATO has been encroaching. They will not stay, even though they had all the power before.
But as for the immediate crisis, let's ask ourselves this. Who precipitated this crisis? The American media says it was Putin and the very bad, though democratically elected, president of Ukraine, Yanukovych. But it was the European Union, backed by Washington, that said in November to the democratically elected president of a profoundly divided country, Ukraine, you must choose between Europe and Russia. That was an ultimatum to Yanukovych. Remember, wasn't reported here, at that moment, what did the much despised Putin say? He said, why? Why does Ukraine have to choose? We are prepared to help Ukraine avoid economic collapse, along with you, the West. Let's make it a tripartite package to Ukraine. And it was rejected in Washington and in Brussels.
Because it's very useful. Okay, it's very useful for them to reject something like that. Because they know that rejecting something like that is going to further increase these tensions and create a more unstable environment with which NATO can go ahead and use its tool set, which is subversion by funding these NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. It's a playbook as old as the Cold War, okay? It's just the way it is. I know so many people are going to say that sounds pro-Russian. I'm not pro-Russian. I'm just trying to hold us accountable for our part in this. You can't keep getting away with this. You just can't.
That precipitated the protests in the streets. And since then, the dynamic that any of us who have ever witnessed these kinds of struggles in the streets unfolded as extremists have taken control of the movement from the so-called moderate Ukrainian leaders. I mean, the moderate Ukrainian leaders with whom the Western foreign ministers are traveling to Kiev to talk, and they've lost control of the situation. By the way, people ask, excuse me, is it a revolution? Is it a revolution? No much abused word. But one sign of a revolution is the first victims of revolution are the moderates. And then it becomes a...
The first victims of revolution are the moderates. Holy moly. This guy, he's a prophet. I mean, look at this. Look at the world that we're seeing today. This decay has been happening for a long time. You can say one side or the other is extreme, but the fact of the matter is we are both extreme. because we are needing to resort to more and more extreme measures to kind of douse the fires of the other side. But we're dousing it with gasoline. You know, I can have my say in what is right, what I think is right. And I'll fight to the death for that. And you're starting to see other people kind of do that same thing on the other side here in America. Look at they're lighting Teslas on fire. Okay? Massive cyber attack on X right now. That is March 10th. Massive cyber attack. You can go ahead and look it up. Is Reddit capable of organizing a cyber attack like that? You need to pay attention. You need to see all the pieces on the graph. You need to see all the dots on the graph. You need to find this line of truth. You need to understand all we want on the right is an end to this war, an end to the subversion of the American people by importing massive amounts of labor that will work for far less than market value, who do not hold our Constitution in any regard. And we want businesses to come back. Those are the only things we really want. Cutting government waste is very important to being able to allocate extra funds to create incentive programs for businesses to come back. And I know you will say that is just a tax cut for the rich, but I will say this every single time. What is a bigger tax cut for the rich? Allowing them to go overseas and utilize near slave markets that are growing to have a larger middle class. Those slave markets will eventually demand higher wages. The things will never stay cheap, I promise you. Or giving those businesses that create jobs and create actual real value in the United States economy, giving incentives to them, giving Americans jobs, and giving a little bit of a kickback to those businesses and tax breaks, okay? They're going to skip out on taxes anyway. That's what they have lawyers for. We all try to do it. We all try to find the way to get away from taxes, okay? You need to think about this logically, and you need to really fucking do it now, okay? You really need to. If you're looking at me and saying that I'm some kind of a far-right extremist right now, you need to take a look, okay?
Struggle between the extreme forces on either side, and that's what we're witnessing.
Let's go to the Ukrainian opposition leader, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who admitted earlier today the opposition does not have full control of protesters in Independence Square.
The only chance to do it is to stop the riot police, to stop the protesters, to impose a DMZ, like demilitarized zone, and to move this conflict from the streets to the parliament.
Parts of the protesters are out of control?
No one, I would be very frank that the government doesn't control the riot police, and it's very difficult for the opposition to control Maidan, and there are a number of forces who are uncontrolled.
So
this is the truth. Ukraine is in a big mess.
That's Ukrainian opposition leader Arseniy
Ukraine is in a big mess. Famous words.
Moderate.
Who
wants to be president?
Let's go to President Obama. He's in Mexico for the big Mexico-Canada-U.S. summit, talking about Ukraine.
With regard to Ukraine, along with our European partners, we will continue to engage all sides, and we continue to stress to President Yanukovych and the Ukrainian government that they have the primary responsibility to prevent the kind of terrible violence that we've seen, to withdraw riot police, to work with the opposition to restore security and human dignity and move the country forward. And this includes progress towards a multi-party technical government that can work with the international community on a support package and adopt reforms necessary for free and fair elections next year. Ukrainians are a proud and resilient people who've overcome extraordinary challenges in their history, and that's a pride and strength that I hope they draw on now.
That's President Obama in Mexico, Professor Cohen.
Can't stop reading about that piece of paper.
Your response to his response.
What he just said, shame. Shame. He is saying that the responsibility for restoring peace is on the Ukrainian government, and it should withdraw its security forces from the streets. But let me ask you, if in Washington, people throwing Molotov cocktails are marching on Congress, and these people are headed for the Ukrainian Congress, if these people have barricaded entrance to the White House and are throwing rocks at the White House security guard, would President Obama withdraw his security forces? This is, and you know.
The answer to that question is yes. That's exactly what they did. They pulled back any security measures and they allowed people on January 6th to get out of control. They knew that it would be politically advantageous of them to make these protesters look violent.
You know what this does? And let's escape partisanship here. I mean, lives are at stake. This incites these kinds of statements that Obama made. It rationalizes what the killers in the streets are doing. It gives them Western license because he's not saying to the people in the streets, stop this, stop shooting policemen, stop attacking government buildings, sit down and talk. And the guy you had on just before, a so-called moderate leader, what did he just tell you? We have lost control of the situation. That's what I just told you. He's just confirmed that. So what Obama needs to say is we deplore what the people in the streets are doing when they attack the police, the law enforcement official. And we also don't like the people who are writing on buildings, Jews live here. Because these forces, these quasi-fascist forces, let's address this issue because the last time...
Okay, so you have anti-Jew forces storming this government?
I was on your broadcast. You found some guy somewhere who said there was none of this there. All right. What percent are the quasi-fascists of the opposition? Let's say they're 5%. I think they're more, but let's give them the break, 5%. But we know from history that when the moderates lose control of the situation, they don't know what to do. The country descends in chaos. 5% of a population that's tough, resolute, ruthless, armed, well-funded, and knows what it wants can make history. We've seen it through Europe. We've seen it through Asia. All it takes is one person. This is reality. And where
one person can change the course of everything. John Wilkes Booth, a lone actor that nobody wanted Lincoln to die. But he had this big balls, chip on his shoulder mindset about how he wants to be a revolutionary. Nobody wanted Lincoln to die. Attempted assassination, Donald Trump. Imagine how different the world would look. And if you're thinking that the world would look so much better, it'd be a peaceful utopia, you need to check yourself. Lee Harvey Oswald, killing Kennedy.
They won't step up and take their responsibility.
Well, even in our most recent history, whether you look at Libya or whether you look at the situation in Syria, where those presidents warned that there were extremist elements inside a broader popular movement that were eventually going to gain control. This seems like a replay in terms of what's going on here in the Ukraine of a popular movement, but yet a very, very, as you say, right-wing movement. Not only a right-wing movement, but a fascist movement with a history. Ukraine has had a history of a fascist movement going back to the days of Nazi Germany.
Let's go to real heresy. Let's ask a question. Who's been right about interpreting recent events? Let's go to the Arab Spring. Obama in Washington said this is about democracy now. This is great. Russia said, wait a minute. If you destabilize, even if they're authoritarian leaders in the Middle East, you're not going to get Thomas Jefferson in power. You're going to get jihadists. You're going to get very radical people in power all through the Middle East.
Fuck, man.
Looking back, who was right or wrong about that narrative? Have a look at Egypt. Have a look at Libya.
Or Syria.
Who was right? Can Russians ever be right about anything? Now what are the Russians saying about Ukraine? They're saying what you just said. That the peaceful protesters, as we keep calling.
Look, I know communism is bad. I know that it leads to suffering. We do not have the energy to tell these people that the way they have that the way they run their country is really that bad. Making it worse for them will not make them safer. It will make them more angry. It will make them easier to control. If you are poor and you are suffering, you will take whatever piece of blame that you can find and you will throw it at the enemy. The only way to have a peaceful The only way to have a peaceful relationship, not peaceful, cordial relationship with Russia, is to take their concerns about the state of the world and understand them. Because Putin is a smart guy. And the thing that these dictators have that we don't is they have longevity in their policies. The United States government is destabilized every 2 years and completely upheaved every 4 years. We do not have the power of foresight that can go beyond 4 years, because any system of plans can be thrown out by the next group of people. It has worked tremendously for us, but it has also been a handicap in a lot of our long-term thinking skills, okay? That's why people don't look 10, 20 years in the future. Meanwhile, Putin's thinking 30, 40 years in the future. That's the one flaw of democracy. The more often you have elections, the more likely you are to weaken yourself in the next election by essentially just restarting all the projects that you've started, but starting them with a different slant now, you know? And God forbid the person before you, if they were on the wrong side, God forbid they have any victories. Tactical empathy. We need to see what Russia wants. We need to see why Russia wants it. And we need to come to a reasonable conclusion. Starting World War III is not a reasonable conclusion.
I think a lot of them have gone home. There were many. By the way, at the beginning, there were hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of very decent, liberal, progressive, honorable people in the streets. But they've lost control of the situation. That's the point now. And so the Russians are saying, look, you're trying to depose Yanukovych, who's the elected government. Think, if you overthrow, and by the way, there's a presidential election in a year. The Russians are saying, wait till the next election. If you overthrow him, and that's what Washington...
Well, we can't wait for the next election because the Russians might win it. They might win a fair election. Maybe it's not fair. It's definitely not fair to have fucking protests in the streets trying to like cause violence to disrupt the outcome of the election. See how both sides can be accused of playing this fucking game?
Brussels are saying that he must go. What are you doing to the possibility of democracy not only in Ukraine, but throughout this part of the world? And secondly, who do you think is going to come to power? Please tell us. And we're silent.
I want to go to the famous leak tape right now. The top State Department official has apologized to her European counterparts after she was caught cursing the European Union, the EU, in a leaked audio recording that was posted to YouTube. The recording captured an intercepted phone conversation between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, and Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe. Nuland expresses frustration over Europe's response to the political crisis in Ukraine using frank terms.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, you know, the EU.
While Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland's...
Oh, my God. Why do they say it behind closed doors? They're fucking terrified. Just say it with your chest, man. It doesn't need to be I'm sinking in my fucking chair. It doesn't need to be this. We can have this discussion. The EU has consistently not been a good ally. Even the Obama administration had insider people saying, fuck the EU. Do you understand where we're at? Holy moly, people.
Comment about the EU dominated the news headlines because she used a curse. There were several other very interesting parts of her conversation with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine.
Fuck you Puritan bastards.
If you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deeds to stick. So Biden's willing.
That's the
Biden,
U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Pyatt, speaking with
How'd that work out? How did fucking Biden work out for your midwife?
Significance of what she is saying. She also had gone to Ukraine and was feeding protesters on the front line.
Cookies. Well, here again, the American political media
goddamn capitalist cookies,
including the right and the left and the center, because they're all complicit in this nonsense, focused on the two sensational, they thought, aspects of that leaked conversation. She said, F the European Union. And everybody said, oh my God, she said the word. The other thing was, who leaked it? Oh, it was the Russians. Those dirty Russians leaked this conversation. But the
it's always the Russians.
You just played. What are they doing?
We have such bad security, we can't stop them from getting into our phone calls. It was the Russians.
And the American ambassador in Kiev are, to put it in blunt terms, plotting a coup d'etat against the elected president of Ukraine. Now, that said, Amy, Juan, you may say to me, neither of you would, but hypothetically, that's a good thing. We don't like this. We don't care if he was elected democratically. He's a rat. He's corrupt.
Hold on.
And he is all those things. He is.
This is important. This right here is important for you guys who are basically hardline anti-Russian about everything. I don't know what he's about to say, but I can tell this guy's about to drop a banger.
It's opposing. That's what the United States should do. Then the United States should stand up and say, that's what we do. We get rid of bad guys. We assassinate them and we overthrow them. But in Washington and Brussels, they lie. They're talking about democracy now. They're not talking about democracy now. They're talking about a coup now.
Well, this is more from...
And we American citizens should be allowed to choose which policy we want. But they conceal it from us. And I'm extremely angry that the people in this...
The American people should be able to choose which policy we want. Do you understand why we don't have a problem with Trump and his aggressive policies? The fact that he is live streaming every single decision that he makes, and we are there with him. We are making these decisions alongside him. Every other government in the past in the United States has basically just said, we're going to give you this one thing, and then in the background, they're double dealing behind our backs. This has been true. Everybody has known it's been true. All of a sudden now, saying that is blasphemous because you're a fucking Trump supporter? Oh my fucking God.
This country,
get real.
Who say they deplore this sort of thing have fallen silent.
Let's listen to a little bit more of the leaked conversation between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, and Victoria.
I can't tell if his lips are really huge.
For Europe.
look at his lips.
I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking, in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
That was Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe, speaking with Jeffrey Piat, the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine. Stephen Cohen, this chess game that they're conducting here.
Explain the names. Who is Cleach? Yats.
All right. And notice the intimacy which with the Americans deal with the two leading so-called moderate, and these are big shots. They both want to be president, Ukrainian opposition. Klitschko is Vitaly Klitschko, a 6'8" former. He resigned his title 2 months ago to enter politics. Heavyweight champion of the world. His residence has been Germany. He pays taxes in Germany. He's a project of Merkel. He represents German interest. I'm sure he's also faithful to Ukraine, but he's got a problem. Yatsenyuk, not Yatsenyuk, but the guy she calls Yats, is the representative of the Fatherland Party. It's a big party in Parliament, but Washington likes him a lot. They think he'll be our man. So you could see what they're saying. We don't quite trust Klitschko. Now, if you want to get esoteric, that's the tug between Washington and Berlin. They're not happy with Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. They don't like the role Merkel's playing generally. They think Germany's gotten too big for its britches. They want to cut Merkel down. So you notice Klitschko, the boxer, is Merkel's proxy, or at least she's backing him. You notice what they say. He's not ready for prime time. Let him do his homework. Now, this guy, I'm bad on Ukrainian names, Yatsenyuk, that they say has got to play a role. He's the leader of the Freedom Party, the Svoboda Party, but a large element of that party, to put it candidly, is quasi-fascist. And they're prepared to embrace this guy. This is the guy, by the way, that Senator John McCain in November or December went to Kiev and embraced. Either McCain didn't know who he was or he didn't care. The United States is prepared to embrace that guy, too. Anything to get rid of Yanukovych, because they think this is about Putin. That's all they...
Okay, so that was a lot to unpack. There's a lot of historical context in there that this would have been right around the time where I was even able to start voting. So what they're talking about is a couple different political parties and their leanings. So we have one guy that apparently is basically just German and everything but where he lives currently. And then we have apparently another side that is fascist. I'm probably not putting all of this particular part in totally accurately, but him talking about him talking about John McCain going and embracing somebody that is looked at as kind of like a pro-fascist individual. That kind of highlights how far the West is willing to go in order to put somebody in power that is anti-Russian. And again, you can look at a lot of historical context. We've all seen the stories. I'm not gonna put fucking sources for what I'm about to say in. And I know you guys use that kind of shit to fucking shut down conversations, or you demand sources for every single fucking thing. Make a video yourself if I'm wrong, okay? Put in some effort into this conversation that we're trying to start globally here. What you need to understand, the United States will put anyone in power if they are slightly pro-Western.
Really got it.
And yet here you have President Obama again speaking yesterday in Mexico.
The United States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in competition with Russia. Our goal is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to make decisions for themselves about their future, that the people of Syria are able to make decisions without having bombs going off and killing women and children.
Who's selling the bombs to them? Who's the one that's like supplying the arms to all these people? Who's the one that was teaching them how to make bombs in like the 80s when they were fighting the Russians? They have a right to choose as long as they choose the West. The older I get, the more I'm starting to realize that I might have been a little bit bamboozled about Obama's success as president. Because like I said, I wasn't able to vote for Obama. But we all looked at, like, oh my God, black guy. Yeah, fuck yeah, black guy. I was in high school, man. I just got out of high school when he was voted in the second time. I wasn't even a part of the world yet. Again, we have kind of this statement that isn't necessarily genuine. And that's the thing that Trump has, is he's genuine. A lot of people say he's awful, but he's genuinely awful. You see what I'm saying?
Or chemical weapons, or towns being starved because a despot wants to cling to power.
Who benefits from the instability, Professor Cohen?
He's got the greatest frown. Like, his frown just goes all the way down. It's classic.
In Ukraine, and what does it mean for Putin? Is he concerned about this?
Well, of course he's concerned. It's right on his borders, and it's all tainting him. I mean, the Washington Post wrote an editorial yesterday. Putin is happy that the violence has broken out in the streets. Everybody understands, even the Washington Post understands, which understands almost nothing about Russia, but they got this, that during the Sochi Olympics, the last thing Putin wants is violence in Ukraine. So why is he happy about it? He deplores it. He's unhappy. He's furious.
So this was happening during the Olympics?
The president of
Convenient.
Ukraine. He read him the
Convenient timing.
Phone last night. That why doesn't he get control of the situation? What is he doing? So Putin's not responsible for this. Can we speak about Obama?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. I grew up in the segregated South. I voted for him twice as historical justice. That's not leadership. That's a falsification of what's happening in Ukraine.
I voted for him twice for historical justice. Holy fucking shit.
And it's making the situation worse. What he says is that we deplore the violence and call upon the Ukrainian government to withdraw its forces and stop the violence. He
Buyer's remorse.
Talk about what's happening in the streets.
And is it conceivable if
Historical justice. Obama, the DEI president.
If Ukraine descends into a further civil war, that Russia might intervene?
It's conceivable. It's conceivable. Here, I mean, Yanukovych, you might say, as an advisor to Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, impose martial law now because you've got bad PR in the West anyway, and you're not in control of the situation. The problem is Yanukovych isn't sure he controls the army.
He just fired the head of the army.
Yeah, we don't know what it means, but it indicates he's not too sure about the army. But by the way, you ask, would Russia intervene? Would NATO intervene? NATO's all over the place. NATO was in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. Ask yourself that. Would NATO send troops in? Is that yes? You think they would? We don't know.
We don't know, yeah.
And I don't think they would. Told, just like we're not.
NATO doesn't do anything. They wouldn't have. They wouldn't have intervened. They would have strongly admonished him.
The president of Ukraine.
They would have censured him.
Yeah, and if the Russians leak them, it doesn't count.
The U.S. can hardly protest, given the whole scandal with the NSA recording
They said, when this got leaked, that this is the low point in statecraft. After Snowden, I mean, what did Tennessee Williams used to say? Mendacity? The mendacity of it all? Don't they trust us, our government, to tell us a little bit of the truth at last?
Stephen Cohen, I want to thank you for being with us. So we're going to move on to Venezuela. Stephen Cohen is Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics.
That's probably a wrap. Final thoughts. Who could have seen it coming? I mean, I hope this guy is alive today to just give everybody the biggest, fattest I told you so.